I thought my son's birthday party would be a happy day, but my sister decided to ignore my warnings, and her prank ended up destroying something much bigger than a cake. My name is Adrian, I'm 34 years old, and I'm a mechanical engineer. I live in Austin, Texas, with my wife, Marina, 32, who works as an elementary school teacher. She's a calm woman, but with strong principles, especially when it comes to our son Lucas, who just turned 11. He's a sensitive and introverted boy. Instead of playing outside like most kids, he prefers to spend hours reading or building complex castles with Lego bricks. My sister Daniela, 25, is the complete opposite. She works in marketing for a startup and has that attitude of wanting to be the center of attention at every meeting. She was always the family darling, something we never hid. My father, Roberto, who worked his whole life at an insurance company before retiring, never denied her anything. She felt guilty because Daniela was born prematurely, and so she spent her life justifying everything she did. Whenever she faced criticism, she repeated the same phrase, "Daniela just wants everyone to have fun." My mother, Estela, works part-time at the library and avoids conflict at all costs. She would always whisper to me, "I know your sister is unwell, but your father keeps defending her, and that never solves the problem." The piece that completes this puzzle is my 78-year-old grandmother, Alba, a woman who was a carpenter for 40 years and lives alone, with a moral clarity that commands respect. She once told me, "Son, there are times when you need a hammer instead of words." At the time, I laughed, thinking it was just a saying. I never imagined that one day I would actually act on that idea. To understand what happened, we have to go back 6 months. It was on my birthday, during a family barbecue. Everything was going well until it was time to cut the cake. When I bent down to blow out the candles, Daniela ran up behind me and shoved my face into the chocolate cake. Everyone laughed, except me. My face was covered in cream and cake while she kept laughing, as if it were the best joke in the world. The worst part was looking at Lucas, who was a few feet away, his eyes wide and his expression one of fear. That night, while Marina was bathing him, he confessed something that chilled me to the bone. "I don't want Aunt Daniela to do that to me." When Marina told me, I felt a knot in my chest. I immediately called my sister. I spoke to her bluntly. "I hope you don't even think about trying that with my son." But her response made it clear she wasn't taking it seriously. "Oh, you're exaggerating. It was just a joke." Then she hung up. I thought I had understood the message, that I would respect the boundaries. I was wrong. A month later the big day arrived, Lucas's 11th birthday. We decided to celebrate at my parents' house because they have a large patio and a pool, perfect for a children's party. My son had chosen his cake 3 weeks earlier, after spending hours looking at designs. He decided on a chocolate castle with cream towers and little flags. He had been dreaming about that cake for months. Marina prepared everything meticulously, decorating the garden with a night theme in shades of blue and silver, and even finding a night suit for Lucas. She invited 8 of his best friends, children with whom he shares school and Lego classes. That morning, while Marina was putting the finishing touches on the preparations in the kitchen, Lucas approached me in the garage with a worried expression. "Dad, Aunt Daniela isn't going to ruin my cake, is she?" It broke my heart to hear him say that. I bent down to look him in the eyes and assured him, "No, son, I already talked to her. Everything will be fine today." During that week, I had seen him practicing in front of the mirror how to blow out the candles, close his eyes, and make the wish he had been holding onto for so long. The party started wonderfully. At 2 in the afternoon, his friends arrived, delighted with the decorations. They played treasure hunt, jumped into the pool, and couldn't stop admiring Lucas's costume. Everything was perfect until, at 2:45, I heard a car engine. Daniela's red Honda parked in front of the house. She came downstairs in a striking outfit, a neon pink top, ripped denim shorts, and thigh-high boots. She wanted to shine, even at a children's birthday party. She raised her arms and shouted, "Ready for your surprise, champ?" The look Marina gave me was enough to tell me what to do. I approached her and whispered, "Remember what I told you?" She replied dismissively, "Relax, I just want to congratulate him." I didn't answer. I decided not to take my eyes off her for the entire party. The most important moment arrived, the cake. Marina placed the majestic castle cake on the decorated table. The children surrounded Lucas, excited. My son smiled with pure happiness, the greatest I had ever seen on him. Marina lit the 11 candles while everyone sang "Happy Birthday." He closed his eyes, took a breath, and then it happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a pink flash approaching. Before I could react, Daniela lunged and slammed Lucas's face into the cake. The impact echoed, frosting flew everywhere, and worst of all, one of the candles was still lit. It grazed my son's left cheek, leaving a slight burn. Silence fell over the garden. No one moved. Everyone froze. Lucas's 8 friends stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Silence filled the garden, abruptly shattering the joy that had reigned until moments before. The 2 youngest, Valeria and Diego, burst into tears, terrified by witnessing something so aggressive and unexpected. They had never seen an adult act that way toward a child. Lucas remained motionless, like a statue, for 5 long seconds. Chocolate dripped from his hair down his face, and crumbs of cake stuck to his night costume. Finally, the boy burst into tears. Without thinking, Marina ran to him. She hugged him tightly and whispered in a trembling voice, "Is everything all right, darling? Mom's here." I, on the other hand, didn't react immediately. I froze, trying to process what had happened. When I finally managed to speak, I stared at Daniela and blurted out with barely contained anger, "What the hell did you just do?" Instead of showing the slightest remorse, she let out a nervous laugh and replied, "It was just a joke. I do it to everyone." I felt my blood boil. I took a step closer, and in a firm tone, I reminded him, "I warned you never to do that to my son." At that moment, my father, Roberto, stood up abruptly, and raising his voice, shouted at me, "Don't speak to your sister like that." Meanwhile, my mother leaned toward Daniela and, in a low but firm tone, said, "You should apologize to Lucas." Everything was chaos. The children were terrified, not knowing where to hide. Andres, one of my son's friends, came over and gently hugged him. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. A few steps away, Valeria, the youngest girl, looked at Daniela with a frown and said loudly, "She's mean." The parents who were beginning to arrive to pick up their children were shocked by the scene. Some of them looked at each other uncomfortably, as if wondering whether they should intervene. No one paid any attention to the destroyed cake or the unopened presents. The birthday party had turned into a complete disaster, and all I could think about was protecting Lucas from further suffering. As my son sobbed in Marina's arms, his small face covered in tears and chocolate frosting, I thought, this wasn't the birthday he'd dreamed of. Then, in the midst of that unbearable tension, my grandmother stood up from her chair. Her deep, calm voice pierced the silence. "Listen to me, everyone." The conversation stopped instantly. Even the wind seemed to stop. With a fixed gaze on Daniela, the grandmother asked, "You were clearly warned. Why did you do it?" Visibly nervous, Daniela stammered, "Grandma, I just wanted everyone to have fun." But the old woman's voice was sharp. "Do you see Lucas having fun? Look at him." My sister's face paled. She wasn't used to being confronted like that. Meanwhile, my son continued to tremble in his mother's arms. The grandmother then turned her gaze to my father. "Son, do you see how your grandson is crying?" He, irritated, retorted sharply, "Don't tell me how to raise my grandchildren. Every parent should discipline their child." The silence that followed was so thick that no one dared to breathe loudly. My mother lowered her gaze, ashamed, while the invited parents remained still, unsure whether to leave or wait. I could hear Lucas's broken sobs and the whisper of the wind rustling through the leaves. Grandma held my father's gaze for several long seconds, until she uttered words that chilled me to the bone. "Okay, I understand." She didn't say it angrily, but with a coldness that sounded like a farewell, as if something inside her had broken forever. Marina, moved to tears, looked at me and whispered, "Let's go home." I nodded silently. I grabbed the jackets and, before leaving, looked at Daniela. "Think about what you did." She gave me an annoyed look and replied, "You're exaggerating. It was just a joke." It was then that I understood. Nobody, absolutely nobody, tried to stop us. There were no apologies, no attempt to fix things. They just watched us leave as if we were the ones to blame. Grandma stood up too. Her eyes filled with disappointment. She looked at my father one last time and said, "Goodbye." But it sounded like a final decision, not just a simple goodbye. 3 more families gathered their belongings and left without a word, sparing their children from witnessing that tense atmosphere. From outside, I heard my father's voice speaking with disdain. "They're making a big deal out of nothing." Those words pierced my soul. I hadn't understood anything. Daniela sat silently, staring at her chocolate-covered hands with a bewildered expression. Perhaps she was beginning to realize that her joke hadn't made anyone laugh. My mother, exhausted, gathered up the cake scraps while murmuring in a whisper, "What an embarrassing birthday." The drive home was completely silent. Lucas didn't say a word. Marina was in the back seat, hugging him tenderly and carefully wiping the last traces of cream from his face. When we arrived, my son refused to eat dinner. He went straight up to his room, got into bed, and covered himself with the blanket, refusing to speak to anyone. Marina helped him get dressed, and while she was cleaning off the last traces of chocolate, she noticed a slight burn on his left cheek, caused by a candle. It wasn't big, but the skin looked irritated. "We should call the doctor to check it out," she told me, worried, as she put a small bandage on it. That's when Lucas, his eyes swollen from crying, looked at her and asked, "Mom, why does Aunt Daniela hate me?" That question left us speechless. I didn't know how to explain adult behavior to an 11-year-old. In the end, I just hugged him tightly, unable to say a word. I stood in the doorway, watching my wife and son, feeling something inside me break. How could I explain to him that his Aunt Daniela didn't hate him? That, in reality, he had never learned to respect others. That night, around 9 o'clock, when Lucas was finally resting in his room, his phone rang. It was Andres, one of his friends. I heard his voice through the speaker. "We think your aunt is a bad person." That made me feel incredibly ashamed. 11-year-olds could see the truth more clearly than the adults in my family. After Lucas fell asleep, I called my grandmother. When he answered, I said, "Thank you for speaking." He was silent for a moment before replying firmly, "Son, I'm not finished yet." The tone in which she said it chilled me to the bone. I knew my grandmother. I wouldn't say anything unless I truly meant it. If I promised to do something, I would do it. That night, lying next to Marina, I stared at the ceiling, wondering how I had really been protecting my son. Perhaps the time had come to make difficult decisions to take care of those who truly mattered. At 5 in the morning, my grandmother arrived at my house, knocked loudly on the door, and told me to come with her to my parents' house. According to her, she had something to take care of. I got dressed without asking and followed her silently. At 6 o'clock sharp, there was a loud banging on my parents' door. My grandmother was knocking insistently until someone opened it. My mother appeared, surprised to see her dressed in her old work clothes, a flannel shirt and worn jeans, just like in her carpentry days. What caught my eye most was the large leather bag she was carrying, so heavy it seemed to hold something important. Without greeting anyone, she said firmly, "Make everyone come down. I have something to say." 10 minutes later, the family was gathered in the living room. My father, sitting on the sofa, was frowning, annoyed at having been woken up so early. Daniela came downstairs in pink pajamas, her hair a mess and her eyes puffy with sleep. My grandmother stood in the middle of the room, looked at everyone, and declared, "This is your last chance. Daniela has to apologize to Lucas in front of the whole family." As soon as she heard this, Daniela shook her head. "I don't think I've done anything wrong." "It was just a joke," he replied cheekily. Then my grandmother turned to my father and looked at him with a chilling coldness. Allowing bad behavior has consequences, she warned him. He let out a dry, contemptuous laugh. Do whatever you want. I'm not afraid of you. She watched him for a few more seconds and calmly repeated that phrase that always heralded a storm. Very well, I've said enough. The air grew thick. My mother, flustered, whispered to my father, you should listen to her. But he remained stubborn, waved his hand dismissively, and muttered. She's an old woman. What could I do? My grandmother didn't get upset. She didn't respond angrily. She bent down, picked up her leather bag, and stood up straight, looking him straight in the eye. In her face, I saw something I'd never seen before, an icy determination, forged over a lifetime of standing up for what was right. Daniela began to feel uneasy. Her eyes sought support, but found only silence. Even my father seemed uneasy under my grandmother's gaze. She asked one last time. Aren't you going to apologize? Despite the fear that was showing in her eyes, Daniela denied it again. I didn't do anything wrong, she repeated. My grandmother felt as if she had expected it. She picked up her bag, headed for the door, and before leaving said calmly, I know what I have to do. After she left, the room fell silent. Daniela looked at my father with anguish, as if she suddenly understood that there would be consequences and that he wouldn't be able to protect her. When we left the house, a loud crash shattered the neighborhood's stillness. The sound of shattering glass woke everyone. My grandmother was standing next to my father's red 1995 Mustang, holding an old wooden baseball bat, the same one I used to play with as a child. It had just smashed the windshield, scattering pieces across the road. My father ran out barefoot, screaming. Are you crazy? That car is a one-of-a-kind. That Mustang was his pride and joy, the fruit of 3 years restoring it from scrap metal to pristine condition. He spent hours polishing every inch with obsessive dedication. My grandmother didn't answer. She raised the bat and struck the headlight, then the side mirror. Each impact sounded like an explosion in the morning calm. 5 neighbors were already watching from behind the fence. Mr. Perez, on the other side, took out his phone to record everything. He knew it would be a topic of conversation. I felt ashamed, imagining the whole neighborhood talking about us. But at the same time, something stirred inside me, a strange relief, as if someone was finally doing what I never dared to do. After the last blow, my grandmother stood up straight, looked intently at my father, and said to him, I'm going to teach you a lesson. Do you want to know what it feels like to see something you love destroyed? At that moment, Daniela came out, crying, with the mark of the pillow on her face. Between sobs, she screamed. What are you doing? That's Dad's car. For the first time, perhaps, she understood that her actions could unleash consequences beyond her control. My mother remained in the doorway, silent, with a sad face, as if she had foreseen this outcome and was powerless to prevent it. My father, motionless, stared at the wrecked car. His eyes were red, not from anger, but from a deeper sorrow, not just for the car, but for what had been broken inside it. My grandmother laid the bat on the ground beside the destroyed vehicle, like a warning. This is what happens when you don't learn respect. Then she turned around and started walking away. No one dared to stop her. The entire neighborhood was speechless, watching her leave. That same morning, the video of the incident went viral in the local Facebook group under the title, 78-year-old grandmother teaches her son a lesson. Within hours, it had racked up hundreds of views and comments. Daniela, embarrassed, didn't know how to explain at work why her grandmother had wrecked her father's car. My father, furious, called the police, but hesitated when they asked him if he wanted to press charges. She knew that intervening would only make the situation worse, especially with the video spreading everywhere. Finally, she told the officers, we'll resolve this within the family. That same morning, during my lunch break, I called my father to see how he was. He barely answered before I started asking questions. I heard him interrupt me. She interrupted me, shouting, Your grandmother has lost her mind. She humiliated the whole family. Hearing those words stirred up mixed feelings in me. On one hand, I understood the pain of seeing something you consider important crumble. But on the other hand, I knew that my grandmother had done what I never dared to do, defend my son. Things didn't improve in the neighborhood either. 3 families who had once been close to my parents began to avoid them. When my father went out to collect the mail, they would barely give him a polite greeting before quickly going back inside. The distance and the silence made him feel isolated in the same place where he had lived for over 20 years. Daniela returned from a long and humiliating day at work. For the first time, she showed real fear. She asked my mother, "What's Grandma going to do now?" For the first time, my mother didn't defend her. She replied coldly, "The truth is, she warned you, and you didn't listen." Those words hit Daniela like a slap in the face. Perhaps it was the first time in her life that she understood that not even her mother supported her. For the first time, she felt alone, not knowing what might happen. When my mother told me what happened in that conversation, I thought that perhaps that would be the lesson everyone needed, the one that would change something. 3 days later, the family lawyer, Hector Gomez, arrived at my grandmother's house. He had been working with us for over 20 years, a serious man, dressed in a gray suit and carrying his ever-present leather briefcase. My parents were invited over to hear an update on the will. That call from the lawyer left everyone uneasy. No one knew what to expect, but there was a bad feeling after what had happened a few days before. The room was thick with tension. Hector sat at the coffee table with a stack of legal documents. My grandmother sat in her usual armchair, resting her chin on her hand, her gaze fixed on everyone present. My father sat next to my mother on the sofa, trying to appear calm, although his nervousness was obvious. Daniela sat in a corner, her eyes red after a stressful day. The lawyer opened the folder and began to read. "At the request of Ms. Alba Gomez, we will proceed to update her will." At that moment, my grandmother stood up and announced, "I am removing Roberto from the will, including any rights to this house." That hit my father like a ton of bricks. That house was valued at $400,000, and he had always counted on inheriting it to secure his retirement. He once told my mother, "At least we'll never have to worry about where to live." After a few seconds of silence, the grandmother continued. "If Daniela doesn't apologize to Lucas within 7 days, she too will be removed from the will." Hector continued reading the new distribution. "Estella will receive 30%. Adrian, 30%. Marina and Lucas, 20% each." My father slammed his hand on the table, his voice trembling with rage as he shouted, "You can't do this. I've taken care of you all these years." My grandmother looked directly at him and replied calmly, "You took care of me, yes, but you failed to teach your daughter to respect others." Daniela burst into tears. She understood that not only her reputation, but also her financial future, were at stake. She never imagined that what happened at a children's party would end with such serious consequences. My mother remained silent, her trembling hands clutching her purse. Her mother-in-law's decision shook her, but deep down she knew it was the inevitable result of years of shielding Daniela from all responsibility. The tension in the room became suffocating. We all understood that my grandmother wasn't joking. She was prepared to rewrite her legacy to defend her principles. After hearing the terms, my father stood up abruptly, his face red with fury. He stormed out of the meeting, slamming the door so hard it echoed throughout the house. It was clear he felt powerless and defeated. Daniela continued crying uncontrollably, but she still insisted. "I didn't do anything wrong." Hearing her say that filled me with deep disappointment. Not even with the inheritance at stake was she able to admit her mistake. What surprised me most was my mother's reaction. He stood up, signed the update confirmation, and said calmly, "You did the right thing." At that moment, I understood that I had endured years of my father's blind support for Daniela. Finally, she was able to express what she had always kept silent about. After all, I took Marina's hand and told her. All I ever wanted was for Lucas to be treated with respect. What surprised me next was Lucas's reaction. When he heard the lawyer read his name in the will, he nodded slightly, as if he understood the weight of it. Hector added, "Lucas's share will be held in a trust managed by Adriana until he turns 18. When everyone had left, my grandmother called me aside and said, "Son, I didn't do this for the money." I understood perfectly what she meant. It wasn't about possessions, but about teaching a lesson, respect, and responsibility. At that moment, Daniela began to grasp the true consequences of her actions. Not only had she lost her family's support, but now she faced the very real possibility of being disinherited. Daniela was being held accountable for the first time in her life, with no one to clean up the mess she'd made. I watched her tremble, looking around as if desperately searching for someone to defend her. But she found only silence and cold stares. No one rushed to comfort her this time. Perhaps, just perhaps, she finally understood that every action has consequences and that there won't always be someone to protect her. The meeting ended in a silence so thick it was hard to breathe. Everyone knew the family would never be the same. The first week after Grandma's decision passed under a cloud of constant tension and pressure. Everyone knew that Daniela only had 7 days to make things right. During the first 2 days, my father called and visited my grandmother several times, begging her to reconsider. He promised her that he would be firmer with Daniela, that he would correct her as she deserved. But the response was firm. All he has to do is apologize. Nothing more. On the third day, Daniela spent 3 hours in front of the computer trying to write an email to Lucas. She wrote, deleted, and rewrote an apology several times, but in the end, she didn't send it. Deep down, she was still convinced she hadn't done anything wrong. By the 4th day, my mother's patience ran out. She looked my father in the eye and said bluntly, "You need to learn how to be a father from scratch." On the 5th day, I received a call from Daniela. Her voice was trembling. "Can I see Lucas? I want to talk to him." When I asked her if she was willing to apologize, she replied, "I just want to explain." On the 6th day, Marina told me firmly. If she comes only to justify herself and not to sincerely apologize, then she's not worth it. Finally, on the 7th day, Daniela arrived at our house. She stated that she wanted to clear up the misunderstanding with Lucas, but she still refused to admit that she had acted wrongly. When the deadline passed without a sincere apology, Grandma kept her word. Daniela was officially cut out of the will. 2 weeks after the birthday debacle, Grandma surprised us with an unexpected proposal. I wanted to organize a new party, exclusively for Lucas. A real celebration just for him. The guest list was short. We were there, along with my son's 5 closest friends, those who hadn't left before or joined the chaos. Grandma's garden was completely transformed with a special theme. A night of honor. She dedicated the entire week to preparing every detail, from royal blue banners to handmade paper crests. She ordered a cake from an exclusive bakery in the city. A masterpiece in the shape of a castle with gold icing and the phrase, "Lucas, you matter." The atmosphere was warm and peaceful, exactly what my son had always wanted. No shouting, no mess, just the genuine laughter of children who wanted to be there. But the most touching moment came when Grandma appeared with a light-colored golden retriever puppy wearing a red bow around its neck. Looking at Lucas, she said, "His name is Simon. Simon will always protect you. He'll never hurt you." Marina couldn't hold back her tears when she saw the smile on our son's face. For the first time in 2 weeks, Lucas hugged his grandmother tightly and said, "I love you so much." At that moment I knew that was his true birthday. A day when he felt seen, respected, and loved as he always deserved. The change in Lucas after that celebration was astonishing. Before, he was a shy boy who avoided conflict and preferred to remain silent so as not to make others uncomfortable. But something inside him changed when Simon came into his life. He became more confident and, most importantly, learned to say no when something didn't seem right to him. I remember one particular moment. A classmate asked to borrow his favorite Lego set, and he responded politely but firmly, "No, I'm sorry." At school, he proudly recounted how his great-grandmother had stood up for him when no one else would. His friends were amazed when they heard the story of their brave grandmother. What filled me with the most pride was when Lucas decided to join the school debate club, something he would never have considered before, since speaking in front of others terrified him. Simone and Lucas became inseparable. She spent hours teaching him tricks and took on all the responsibility of caring for him, from feeding him to taking him for walks. One afternoon, while watching them play in the garden, I said to Marina, "He's a completely different child now. She knows she deserves respect." She nodded and took my hand. At that moment I understood that the best gift Grandma had given her wasn't just a puppy, but the confidence to stand up for herself and the strength to protect herself. While Lucas grew stronger every day, Daniela's life was falling apart. At work, her colleagues began to distance themselves from her after the video of her grandmother vandalizing her father's car went viral and the family scandal became a common topic of conversation. Whenever Daniela entered a room, the conversations would abruptly stop. Her social life didn't improve either. Some friends began to question her directly. Why would you do that to a child? For the first time, she had to face the real consequences of her actions without anyone defending her. She discovered that what she had dismissed as a simple joke had caused real harm. Then came the financial pressure. Now she had to cover all her expenses alone: rent, utilities, food, things that my father used to silently take care of. It was then that she realized how dependent she had been on her family. To make matters worse, even my father began to distance himself, pressured by my mother, who made it clear that she would no longer tolerate his blind protection. Eventually, after several complaints at work about his attitude, Daniela was forced to start therapy. It was the first time he had to look in the mirror and confront the toxic behaviors he had always refused to acknowledge. The perfect life he thought he had completely crumbled. In the third week after the incident, my father began to reflect on the way he had raised us. Between sleepless nights and the weight of watching his daughter lose everything, he finally confronted a truth he had avoided for years. One night, sitting next to my mother on the sofa, he asked her, his voice heavy with guilt, "Do you think I ruined Daniela?" That question opened the door to memories neither of them wanted to relive. He remembered all the times he had protected Daniela since they were children. From making up excuses for the teachers when she didn't hand in her homework, to silently paying her speeding tickets. Each time, he convinced himself that it was his duty as a father to take care of his daughter. However, when faced with the consequences of those decisions, he finally understood the damage he had caused. Once he accepted his mistakes, he decided to talk to Daniela and encourage her to offer Lucas a sincere apology. But when he gently suggested she take responsibility for what had happened, she exploded. "Why are you turning your back on me now?" That moment hit him hard. It was then that he understood he had created a problem, a daughter incapable of admitting her mistakes, convinced that she was always right. For the first time in his life, my father decided to side with his mother instead of continuing to defend Daniela. He picked up the phone, called my grandmother, and said, "You were right. I failed with Daniela." That was a turning point. She finally chose the truth over blind loyalty. One quiet weekend afternoon, while Marina was taking Lucas to his grandmother's house to play with Simone, she invited me to sit down for a private conversation. It was the first time she had spoken openly to me about her past. We sat on the garden bench, she gazed into the distance, and began to tell me her story. She explained that, after her parents died, she had to learn to work as a carpenter from the age of 16 to survive. In a world dominated by men, she had no choice but to learn to defend herself and protect her worth in the face of judgment and discrimination. She told me something I'll never forget, that sometimes you have to wield a hammer, not to hurt or to seek revenge, but to build and defend the boundaries that safeguard self-respect. Those boundaries aren't drawn to cause pain, but to preserve dignity, both our own and that of those we love. When I asked her about the change in the will, she sighed and confessed that she regretted allowing my father to indulge Daniela for so long. She believed that love would be enough to teach him what's right, but life had proven her wrong. She said she wanted Lucas to grow up understanding that he deserves healthy love, without tolerating disrespect disguised as affection. After that conversation, Grandma began teaching Lucas how to build a shelf with his own hands. He learned how to hold a hammer, nail precisely, and measure each board. But I knew it wasn't just carpentry she was teaching him. I was teaching her to build her self-esteem, to recognize her worth and stand firm, knowing that she deserves to be treated with care. It wasn't just about tools, it was a lesson in building a life based on respect. 2 months after everything that happened, Daniela wrote a sincere letter of apology after several therapy sessions. It wasn't a quick message or an email, but a handwritten letter, 3 full pages long. In it, he admitted he had been wrong, acknowledged the profound impact his actions had had on Lucas, and promised to work on becoming a better person. He didn't make excuses or try to blame anyone else. She took full responsibility for hurting her nephew. She decided to mail the letter instead of delivering it in person, understanding that the family needed space and time. When the letter arrived, we sat down together with Lucas to read it. He listened to every word in silence, reflected, and finally said in a low voice, "I need more time to think." I respected his decision. The letter was a big step forward for Daniela, but rebuilding trust takes time. In addition, Daniela began volunteering at a community center with children, learning to interact with them in a healthy and respectful way. It was a clear sign that she was committed to change. When Lucas's next birthday approached, I agreed to let Daniela send him a card, even though I couldn't attend in person. It was a small but significant step. My father and Daniela have also had to work on their relationship. This time, it was based on mutual respect, not blind protection. It hasn't been easy, but it was necessary for both of us. Healing, like growing, takes time. 6 months after that incident, I decided to share our story on the Real Family Stories podcast. I wanted to talk about the painful but valuable lessons we learned. I sincerely thanked my grandmother, who dared to speak out when everyone else remained silent. She taught us to value emotional boundaries, especially when it comes to children. The central message I wanted to convey was clear: teaching children to stand up for themselves and speak up when they are mistreated is not optional, it is essential. No one, not even family, has the right to hurt them under the guise of it being just a joke. Lucas is no longer the shy, reserved boy he once was. Now he is calm, self-assured, and knows how to love and be loved in a healthy way. Above all, he understands that he deserves respect. My family, Marina, Lucas, and I, is closer than ever. We have clear boundaries, mutual respect, and genuine protection for one another. We've learned to speak up, not to stay silent. In the podcast, I said my son has a true hero, and that person is his great-grandmother. I closed the episode with a picture of Lucas, sitting in the living room next to Simone, reading a book, safe, happy, and surrounded by the space we've worked so hard to provide him. As for Daniela, she continues on her healing journey. I've left the door open to reconciliation, but on one condition: he must respect my son. The last lesson I shared was this: true family isn't about accepting harmful behavior, but about creating an environment where everyone feels respected and protected. That's our story: a birthday cake, a courageous grandmother, and a lesson about the importance of setting boundaries to protect those we love. Thus ends my story.